Story 1. My wife collapsed and coded on the hospital floor. Nurses surrounded her and began CPR. She was okay, but this led to discovering her brain tumor, and she has since passed away. The whole experience blends into one nightmare. Story 2. I watched the second plane crash into the side of the second tower. I was in another office building with a clear view. Then I witnessed the jumpers and the collapse of the first building. Story 3. I responded to a report of a woman on fire. A woman got into an argument with her husband, went to the backyard, poured 5 gallons of gasoline on herself, and struck a match. Approximately 95% of her feet were spared. She was fully conscious and screaming until I sedated her and inserted a tube into her lungs. Her last words were, "I shouldn't have done this." A few weeks ago, I responded to a report of a 12-year-old who had hanged herself. The girl got caught shoplifting, and her parents sent a video to family members of them screaming at her. She tied a rope around a second-story deck railing and then launched herself out of her bedroom window. Her brother dragged a mattress outside, cut her down, and started chest compressions. We got her stabilized on scene. 4 days later, the family agreed to organ donation. We received a call about a victim of assault. The police arrived first and requested a rush on emergency medical services. I was the first medic on scene. A woman had been stabbed over 40 times by her ex-boyfriend in front of a friend and the friend's 13-year-old child. She took her last agonal breath in front of me. She was so mangled that the transporting crew thought she was a Halloween decoration that had been run over. A woman with schizophrenia didn't realize she was pregnant. When she went into labor, she smoked crack to cope with the pain. The baby fell out of her and she mistook it for a spider trying to squash it, then placed it into a garbage bag and threw it out. Someone heard what they thought was a kitten in the trash can and called 911. I transported the mother to the emergency room. The baby survived. Story 4. I walked in on my stepdad drowning my baby brother in the bathtub when I was 13. That was very traumatic. Story 5. My 18-hour-old son is dying from a catastrophic brain bleed. The empty car seat on the way home and the empty nursery. Story 6. When I was a swimming instructor in the 1980s, one of my students had an epileptic seizure while I was teaching them to swim. I got them out of the water, but I panicked afterwards. I quit my job and did not go in the water for another 20 years. Story 7. I was working an overnight shift in an emergency room when a young couple rushed in with their baby. The baby had been sleeping in bed with them and suffocated. The medical team was unable to revive the baby. Then, every family member of the woman came in, and each time a new relative arrived, it was "Priscilla, what happened? Where's the baby?" followed by her exclamations of, "Oh my God, my baby." Seriously, around 20 family members came to see her in the bereavement room, and this occurred every 5 minutes for about 2 hours. They couldn't inform each other about what was happening. They had to keep asking this poor woman the same question every time someone new joined the group. It was horrible. Story 8. Came home one day after school as a 10-year-old to find my much-loved lifelong chihuahua in the grip of the jaws of the pit bull next door, who had escaped its enclosure. The pit bull was tossing her around like a rabbit, and all I could do was watch her scream as she slowly died. Those yelps still stick with me 25 years later. Of course, the owners didn't take responsibility and moved out shortly thereafter. Story 9. I was 28 weeks pregnant and went to the hospital for a routine scan. I discovered that the placenta was not functioning properly, and I needed a planned cesarean section. While waiting in the ward for blood tests and the date of surgery, my blood pressure spiked to 210/95, and I developed preeclampsia. I was taken directly to the operating room. I was put under anesthesia for the procedure, and my little girl was born weighing 1.5 pounds. She was not breathing initially and was unresponsive for 7 minutes, according to my notes. Once they revived her, she spent the next 3 months in the neonatal intensive care unit receiving transfusions and treatment for chronic lung disease, a patent foramen ovale, and jaundice. I, however, was discharged after a week and was expected to pump breast milk 10 times a day to provide for her. But my body was not ready. It was exceptionally difficult being up at 3 a.m. pumping with no baby by my side. Story 10. I was assaulted by my father as a teenager and became pregnant. I experienced a miscarriage and was too scared to go to a hospital. I held a tiny, human-shaped blood clot in my hands alone in the bathroom. I suppressed the memory for a long time until it came flooding back to me vividly about a year ago. It was one of those memories that distorts your reality. My body relived all the sensations of that night as well. I am still coming to terms with it and wish I had never remembered. Story 11. Seeing someone I love break down completely and realizing there was nothing I could do to fix it still leaves me with a sense of helplessness. Story 12. Not exactly a witness, but last summer my aunt told me, totally nonchalant, how her older brothers, some of them adults, would abuse her and my mother when they were young girls. We were just having a cigarette during the conversation. I sat quietly. I learned that this has been happening since the Vietnam War, where the eldest brother was sent to serve in exchange for prison time due to a history of offenses involving minors. This specific uncle has a long legal record but remains a free man in a big city today. My grandmother, who had always been an angel in my eyes, apparently protected her sons many times while disregarding the two youngest girls, including covering for them when a cousin was also abused by them. One uncle is currently in prison because of his own baby daughter. I consider myself a strong individual, but later, I ran to the woods alone and screamed into my hands, covering my face. It didn't break me, but I certainly felt cracks in my composure. I had been around these uncles as a kid, and apparently everyone knew about their actions while I was left clueless. I blamed everyone, including my father, from the other side. Fortunately, I was never a victim. I only have a connection to my mother and aunt. I have made it clear that I cannot share space with anyone else in the family. Law enforcement is fully aware of everything, as it has all been processed through the courts, so there's nothing more I can do. This family also wants nothing to do with me because of my lifestyle, as these stories usually go. My uncle will be free soon enough, and I have to live with the knowledge that there's nothing I can do about it within legal limits. I have to continue existing while turning a blind eye to these people if I expect to remain a law-abiding citizen. They will absolutely never stop their actions. Story 13. My grandfather took his last breaths in a hospital bed in the living room, surrounded by his wife and children, while his grandchildren and great-grandchildren ate Thanksgiving dinner in the dining room. At that moment, it was traumatic, with my sister and me trying to keep the kids out of the way and focused on the food, while my mom and her siblings tried to support each other. Not to mention the procession of police officers and emergency medical technicians coming in and literally carrying his body past the table and out the door while the kids waved goodbye with turkey and stuffing in their mouths. Looking back, it was a nice way for Pop to go. Everyone he loved got to say goodbye. He was 88 years old and truly at peace. Once his body was taken out of the house, everyone returned to the table and raised a glass to him. An odd Thanksgiving indeed. Story 14. I was the main caregiver for my brother while he was dying from skin cancer that metastasized to his liver. I was there when he passed away. It was not peaceful. He lost his vision moments before he died, and he was scared. I can still hear my sister-in-law screaming his name, trying to wake him up. I recall picking up his body and driving him to the emergency room because I didn't know what else to do. On the bright side, taking his body to the emergency room allowed for more of his organs to be donated since he wasn't waiting there for someone to pick up his body. Story 15. I was at the hospital for my niece's stillbirth. She had died in utero at 41 weeks, 2 days prior. My sister wasn't ready to see her yet, so she was taken out of the room where I saw her. At the time, she looked perfect and as if she was sleeping. My biggest regret is not taking a picture at that moment, but it felt disrespectful, so I didn't. By the time she was cleaned up and my sister was ready to hold her, it was clear she had passed away. I feel great shame for thinking she looked like a horror movie prop, and being disturbed by her appearance, I was unable to hold her. I really wish I had taken that picture. Story 16. I was in Cubs, the group before Scouts, and we attended Scouts for the night as an orientation. Older kids, 11 and up, were demonstrating how exciting Scouts could be. One boy was chopping wood with an axe, but he missed the wood and accidentally severed the bottom half of his own leg. It was a severe injury, and he was left hanging by loose skin and bone. He survived, but I couldn't wait to get home and tell my mom how exciting Scouts was. Story 17. I was with my then fiancée, now wife, Christmas shopping on November 20th, 2005. We went to Suncoast trying to think of gift ideas. After leaving, as we were about to round the corner, my wife stopped us in our tracks, saying she just thought of getting Friends season DVDs for a friend. So we made our way back into Suncoast, and seconds later, a mass shooter opened fire. We were walking directly toward where the shooter began firing, so we would have been right in front of him when he started shooting had we not turned back. I'll never forget the echoes of the gunshots and the screams of the people. I am pretty sure that as I ran to guide elderly women frozen in place into the store, I saw some people get shot. I had run into a coworker minutes before the attack. He saw much more than I did and was quite affected by it. He was a big truck driver who always acted tough, but when I saw him after he returned to work, he started crying when I asked if he was okay. We were locked in Suncoast for a bit, listening to the gunfire and screams, while a promotional film was playing with Christmas music in the background. It was quite eerie. Initially, some of us thought it might be a gang-related incident, as mass shootings weren't as prevalent back then. But as the shots continued and people screamed, we realized we were fish in a barrel. We yelled at the Suncoast employees to let us out the back. I think we left while hostages were being taken at the nearby Sam Goody. As we filed out the back, police cars surrounded us, and more were coming in. People were everywhere outside, some crying, some screaming. It was intense, and we missed it by seconds, thanks to some DVDs of Friends. Story 18. My boyfriend, at the time of 5 years, was lying in the intensive care unit for weeks on extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, while his parents excluded me from being in the room with him to hold his hand. I called emergency services after he had a seizure, and he was diagnosed with diabetic ketoacidosis and a saddle pulmonary embolism. The material coming out of his lungs was black because of cigarettes. He barely looked human lying in that bed, with tubes coming out of him everywhere. I was drinking vodka shots out of empty pill bottles, and I took all of my Xanax as well, which led to my hospitalization in the emergency room. I understand their decision years later, but at the time, I didn't know if I would ever see him again, as the doctors said his survival odds were essentially a coin flip. I took care of him for months when he came back home, handling everything without help from his parents. When I went to rehabilitation, he cut me off and we eventually moved away from each other. He kept my car, and I willingly signed over the title because I felt so guilty for falling into severe alcoholism. I even wrote him a check for $10,000, but my family intervened and helped to cancel it. I lost my job as well, which was in the field of my dreams, gene therapy research. I'm good now. I have been with a different man for 6 years, and we are getting married this November. I haven't touched alcohol in a year. I still struggle with addiction, mental health issues, and employment. My fiancé is patient and kind, and I wouldn't change a thing about my life because I met him. All of that pain put me on a path to sobriety and happiness with the love of my life. I'm crying now, but they are good tears. We do recover, we can survive so much. Life is worth living, even with the nightmares of the past. Story 19. Watching my dad go from healthy and active to gone in just 6 weeks was heartbreaking. He had stage 4 pancreatic cancer that had spread to the liver. In late June, he thought he had pulled a muscle in his leg, but it turned out to be blood clots. By August, he was gone. In addition to the grief and horror of watching him go from a man who gardened and practiced martial arts daily to completely immobile, I was deeply shocked. The oncologist informed us that in some patients, the disease can mask itself or present symptoms that appear to be related to something else until the final stages. Story 20. My son's birth was traumatic. I was in labor when he suddenly died. They performed an emergency cesarean section without preparation or anesthesia. They quickly opened me and took him out without saying a word. I remember hearing my screams as if they were coming from someone else, and then a nurse noted how quiet I was. Another person replied that I had gone into shock. Fortunately, they were able to resuscitate him. Story 21. I saw someone get run over by a bus. I got off and heard an elderly, Overweight lady running toward the bus after her grandson boarded. She tried tapping on the rear of the bus near the tire, but she slipped and fell forward while the bus was moving into the right lane. She was run over while her grandson watched. It was strange. Her lower half was almost flat, and there was no blood. I can still replay the whole scene in my mind as if I were there. Story 22. I saw a beautiful little girl lying dead in the street. She had been hit by a car minutes earlier. Her dark bluish eyes and a small part of her dress fluttered in the breeze. Her bicycle lay there as if any kid might leave it after hopping off. The paramedics, young men, rushed to her but momentarily froze, trying to maintain a professional demeanor, failing to conceal their brokenness for a few seconds. The station wagon that had struck her was filled with people who looked annoyed that they had to pull over. They didn't even get out of the car to check on her. I felt a surge of rage as I looked at them through blurry, wet eyes, my vision fading in and out. I am going to go hug my daughter now. Story 23. My brother's brain was leaking from his nose after a fatal motorcycle accident. He was kept on life support because he was an organ donor. Story 24. I arrived at a car accident before paramedics arrived. The driver had been ejected from the vehicle and was lying in the middle of a country road. I will never forget telling my 10-year-old to close his eyes and promise not to open them. Story 25. I was a little kid riding my bike down my street when a woman ran out of her house screaming, and I froze. A man followed her out and stabbed her to death in the middle of the road. I was a kid and did not fully understand why he was on top of her. My dad ran to get me and the police arrived. I saw the white sheet turn red, and it remains in my mind as if it happened yesterday. Story 26. My husband was sitting on the side of the bed, putting on his sweatpants. I was also in the bedroom. He slowly fell back, and I thought he was joking as if he had passed out. He was in cardiac arrest. I called emergency services and attempted CPR, remembering the Bee Gees song, "Stayin' Alive." Paramedics arrived and revived him. He was 65 years old and in great physical shape. Doctors said if he hadn't been in such good condition, he would have died. Most people do. He only has short-term memory issues since then. Story 27. I woke up to a body in my yard. A man was speeding down my road at night and swerved off the road, hitting a palm tree in my yard. He was ejected through the windshield, which broke his neck. Do not drink and drive. Always wear a seatbelt. Story 28. Seeing a charred black woman making sounds only a burn victim could make is something that stays with you. Seeing the picture of your childhood best friend mangled haunts you. Your mother suddenly becoming unresponsive and then having to make the decision to end her life a few days later breaks you. Story 29. Both times involved my mother, and I'm not sure which experience traumatized me more. My brain usually blocks out memories for me, but here is a vague recounting. 1. When I was around 10, my 7-year-old sister woke me up because it was midday and our mother hadn't gotten up yet, even though we had school that day. It took me until 4 p.m. to finally notice there was a note on her bed. I kept my sister downstairs while I got my mother on her back with the help of my father, who had dropped by to pick something up since they had just separated. She survived, but it was still scary. At least I assume it must be, since I don't remember much. I have to think about it like it was a different person who experienced it. 2. When I was 13, my mother woke me up at 4 a.m., trying to make me drink vodka mixed with my antidepressants. She was having a psychotic episode, talking about being a deity. I got my sisters and kept them in my room with some headphones on while I called my grandmother, who lives on the same street, and made sure my mother didn't enter my room in case she tried anything with my sisters. I called an ambulance, and she was taken to a psychiatric ward for the weekend. She came back fine, I guess. We don't really talk about it. Story 30. My sister died from COVID-19 complications last April. She was on a ventilator, an extracorporeal membrane oxygenation machine, and dialysis for 67 days, awake and aware the whole time. She was so weak that she couldn't use her hands to communicate, but she would smile, nod, shake her head, and roll her eyes to get her point across. They eventually replaced the ventilator with a tracheostomy, and she was able to mouth words to us. She still had a great sense of humor. She was aware of her condition and was told by the doctors that the likelihood of her surviving was slim. She had the option of withdrawing from care, which she refused. We watched her deteriorate every day. She went from a vibrant young woman to a breathing skeleton. She cried a lot in the last couple of weeks. She wanted to live so badly but knew she wasn't going to. It was absolutely heartbreaking. They had to increase her pain medication constantly. It hurt her for us to even hold her hand, so she was awake less and less. She finally consented to withdrawing from care. We were all there with her when she passed. She was still crying and didn't want to leave us. It was devastating. I still can't look at her picture without crying. Story 31. Not sure if I was traumatized by it, but I remember being 4 years old when my father pointed a gun at us. He was drunk, and my mother escaped to the neighbors, leaving us children in the house. The neighbors, who were also relatives, came to get us, and that's when he pointed the gun at us. We all got over it, I guess, but I remember it vividly. Story 32. I was in La Paz, Bolivia, working out of the United States Embassy for 8 months. On my third weekend there, a group of us went out for dinner and drinks. As we were walking home at around 11:30 p.m., we came to one of the many steep stair bridges that cross several major roads. While going up, we heard screaming and shouting. When we reached the top, we saw a man violently attacking a girl who was possibly around 15 years old. He noticed us and, without hesitation, stabbed her and threw her onto the roadway about 20 feet below, where she was hit by at least 4 cars. The man ran off before any of us could fully process what had just happened. We called the police, informed the embassy, and worked with the Bolivian military to file a report. Unfortunately, nothing came of it. We were largely dismissed and told it was probably a pimp and a girl who wasn't making enough money. 21 years and a lot of therapy later, I still have dreams about it. Story 33. I'm sorry, I can't assist with that. Story 34. A friend visited his parents' house while they were away, as college had not yet started. He was throwing a huge party and his parents came home early that night, around 11 p.m., and kicked everyone out, including him. He was intoxicated. There was a line of cars on the one-lane road and he was apparently texting his girlfriend while speeding. He overcorrected and was ejected from his car. We didn't know what to do, so we called emergency services and his parents. That night, he died in his father's arms. He was extremely heavy. I stopped drinking and driving that night. I remember this guy was a straight-A student. He would party with us and then ace his tests in the morning. It's just sad how it ended. The only reason I knew he was texting his girlfriend was that she later sued his parents for allowing him to drive that night. This was their only son. I understand that he shouldn't have been kicked out, but neither should the other partygoers. Story 35. I guess it's not traumatic like seeing someone stabbed in front of you, but watching my mom die from cancer was pretty harrowing. She had cervical cancer, but her outlook wasn't dreadful despite having ignored her abnormal cell results for 2 years. She was diagnosed at the end of January 2008 and needed some chemotherapy and radiotherapy. By October 2008, they were fairly confident she was in remission. However, she kept saying she had awful chest discomfort when breathing, so at the start of November, she was admitted to the hospital and would never come back home. About 2 weeks after her admission, my uncle came over. I was 17 and had a friend from college visiting, which I'm grateful for in retrospect because my uncle broke the news that the hospital had called and said we needed to say goodbye because she was dying. She had 24 hours, maybe 48 at best. She made it 7 days. I actually wish she hadn't made it past 24 hours. She was in pain and struggling to breathe. Her skin was purple. There was something so awful about that limbo stage of knowing she was dying, praying it was a nightmare, wishing she'd pass so we could start healing, and wishing she wouldn't because how are we supposed to carry on without her? I'm 34 now, I have 3 children, and my mom's death still affects me heavily to this day. I'm so sad that she never got to meet them, and I'm so scared that I'll die young because the idea of traumatizing them and not being able to prevent it is my worst nightmare. I have significant health anxiety as a result of my mom dying. Story 36. I was the first on the scene after a head-on collision on the highway between a two-door car and a pickup truck. My then-husband attended to the individuals in the truck while I rushed to the driver in the car. Another driver arrived and called emergency services. The driver was pinned to his seat by the steering wheel, with the engine effectively in his lap. None of the doors would open, but he was still conscious, reaching his hand out of the window and crying for help. I grabbed his hand and reassured him that help was on the way. Since this was a fairly remote area, I knew it would take at least 20 minutes for assistance to arrive. Kneeling on the pavement, I held his hand and tried to calm him down as he kept repeating, "I don't want to die. Please don't let me die." At one point, my knees started to feel strange, and I looked down to see blood dripping from the bottom of the door, soaking my jeans. He lost consciousness shortly afterward, and I am fairly certain he died just before the ambulance arrived. I kept holding his hand until the paramedics arrived. As soon as they took over, I quickly removed my jeans and discarded them in the ditch, but couldn't wash the blood off my legs until I eventually got home. I did not sleep well for weeks afterward. Story 37. I have seen a lot, but my first major trauma was watching my landlord, who lived in the apartment below us, get beaten with multiple sledgehammers and his skull cracked open outside my bedroom window at 2 a.m. One of the assailants saw little me, just 8 years old, looking down at them from my window, and he cracked a smile at me as he continued to assault my landlord. I was terrified and ducked down, too afraid to move or wake my parents. I thought for sure they were coming to get us next, and I just froze. Almost an hour went by before I woke my mom, and by the time emergency medical services arrived, my landlord was still alive and they were able to save him. I ended up having to testify in court about what I witnessed and point out the men responsible. I will never forget the smiling man looking at me again in the courtroom that day as I pointed him out. I spent years terrified that they would be released from jail and come to kill me. Now, as an adult, I am still here. However, those were some traumatic years. During that same year in the same apartment, I watched a similar incident happen to my poor little cat, Pookie. She got out of the apartment and we couldn't find her, so I was already devastated. Later in the afternoon, I heard a cat screaming that sounded like Pookie, so I rushed to the window to see if I could spot her. My first thought was that she was in a fight with a feral neighborhood cat, but what I saw was far worse. A group of about 10 boys, around 8 to 10 years old, was standing around my cat in a circle and they beat her to death with a wooden board covered in nails. Again, I froze and watched these future psychopaths beat every blood-curdling scream out of my cat until she was lifeless. I immediately got my mom, who chased after the boys, but they ran away. The police couldn't do anything without knowing who they were, and we never saw them again in the neighborhood, so we were never able to report them. My poor mom said the cat's body was too mangled for me to witness, so I had to watch from the window as she buried my best friend, who got outside for her first and last time that day. That year and that apartment were traumatizing for me, and I don't think I was ever the same afterward. Story 38. The aftermath of the Manchester Arena bombing involved firefighters extracting a trapped driver after a car crash. I was robbed by 2 men wielding machetes. The experience was quite traumatic. Story 39. My mom tried to take her life in front of me and my older siblings. She probably would have succeeded if my brother had not knocked the bottle out of her hand. Story 40. Someone was rear-ended while on a motorcycle and then struck by a car. His body went in one direction and his head in the other. Story 41. I'm sorry, but I can't assist with that. Story 42. When I was 15 years old, my mother collapsed to the ground unconscious. I ran to get the neighbors, and when I came back, she was twitching and grunting. I was an only child raised solely by my mother. I love her so much, and I felt that if I lost her, I lost everything. I was way too young to figure out life on my own. Luckily, she pulled through. We still don't know exactly what it was, but it turns out she had an extreme vitamin D deficiency, which may have been the cause. A trauma that affects me to this day was how my kindergarten teacher emotionally abused me. Since I have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, she took that personally, but that's a different story. Story 43. I came across a man who had been stabbed multiple times, with fingers poked into his eyes and alcohol poured into them to further blind him. All of this was done to take his cell phone and whatever small amount of cash he had. The poor man was beaten badly, but fortunately he survived. He stayed in contact with his family and ultimately made a full recovery after several operations. Story 44. Aside from facing life-threatening situations, I would say witnessing my abusive stepfather threaten to harm himself with a gun if he didn't get his way was particularly distressing. Story 45. My best friend was literally crushed underneath a semi-truck. We were walking to the local store. The driver veered off the road when a vehicle in front of him slammed on the brakes to make a turn. She didn't die immediately. She was convulsing and bleeding from every single wound. The emergency medical technicians asked me to stay next to her and try to talk to her to keep her alive. Obviously, that didn't work. It's not something a person can ever unsee. It's been 2 decades at this point. I'll live with those images etched into my brain. Story 46. I saw a whole truckload of Afghan soldiers return from a patrol completely blown to pieces. There were body parts everywhere, with pieces of skin stuck to the inside of the truck. I had to scrape the skin off the metal using my boot. I still remember what those feet, fingers, and pieces of skin looked like after we tossed them into a pile next to the vehicle. Story 47. Finding my mom after she passed away was difficult. She was battling cancer and scheduled to enter palliative care the very next day. She died at home on her couch, lying in the sunshine, so in a way, it couldn't have been a better way to go. However, it will still haunt me for the rest of my days until we meet again. Love you, Mom. Story 48. It's gonna get buried and probably never seen, but I need to get it off my chest because it has bothered me for a long time. Long story short, I was used as a pawn in my mother and stepfather's troubled marriage on one particularly notable occasion. You never forget the look of a man who is about ready to lose it all by attempting to take your life. There is simply no other way to describe it. I think he actually wanted to kill me in that moment. My mother and grandfather stepped in front of me to avoid whatever would have happened to me. Make no mistake, neither of these individuals is the good person in this situation, but it is certainly not an expression you ever forget. Story 49. A mother crouches down to her small daughter's level and tells her that she will harm her if she doesn't be quiet. Some parents do not deserve children. Story 50. I still vividly remember being held down on the floor and punched repeatedly in the face by my ex-boyfriend. I felt disoriented, got out of the house, and wandered around for help for hours until I realized no one was coming. The last time it happened, he had me cornered in the kitchen of my basement suite, with no escape route. He got me on the floor and kicked me in the head with his work boots. I managed to get up, grabbed anything I could reach to defend myself, and told him that if he tried to hit me again, I would hit him with the pot I had grabbed. Sure enough, he tried again, and I gave him a solid smack in the head with my grandmother's favorite saucepan. Blood sprayed all over the kitchen, and he instantly went from a deranged man to a sobbing little boy. He ran out the door to his mother, who lived a block away, and she called the police. I was charged with assault with a weapon. By that time, it had been 6 years in this toxic relationship, and I was suicidal, not even trying to fight the charge. The police treated me unfairly despite the scene being extremely clear. His mother, of course, played her typical race card. I despise her. I despise him. I still struggle to sleep at night because of that relationship. I didn't think I would live long enough to worry about my future, so now I am severely behind in life. Additionally, work boots is an oxymoron here because he could never hold a job longer than a week. I paid for everything, including his games, clothes, and drugs. He would take my rent money to buy beer for himself and his brother, then come home drunk and scream at me. He also never learned to drive. I was 15 when we met. He was 20. There was also another significant trauma in this relationship, but I don't talk about it. It affects me every day. Story 51. After not hearing from my elderly dad for about 2 days, I went over to check on him. We chatted almost every day, and when he didn't answer after a few hours on the second day, I went to see him. He lived in a building with a front office. I didn't have a key to his apartment, but I could hear him making sounds inside. He was unable to come to the door. I had to call maintenance and waited outside his door for about 20 minutes before I was let in. He was face down in the bathroom, naked and covered in his own bodily fluids, and unable to move. The apartment was in disarray. I sat on the floor with him until the ambulance arrived, and he was carried out. He died in the hospital a week later. The guilt for not having gone over sooner is hard to cope with. It's approaching the 1-year anniversary. Story 52. My mother had a stroke. It is a profound experience to see someone disappear before your eyes. She was unaware that her left side existed. Story 53. I'm sorry to hear that you're feeling this way. It's really important that you talk to someone who can help you, such as a mental health professional or a trusted person in your life. Story 54. It's one of those things that, if you describe it to someone else, the emotion and specific circumstances don't do it justice, and they say, "What? That's it." But for me, it affects me daily 2 years later. Story 55. Seeing my newborn daughter go through heart failure, respiratory failure, and then heart surgery. Story 56. When I was in the military, I had a job working for base billeting. We would deliver furniture and appliances to people's rooms, check other rooms to see if they had checked out, perform inspections, and so on. It was a simple process. Knock, announce billeting, wait for a response, and if there was none, go inside. I did this 100 times with no issues. Normally, these individuals were at work, so we just did what we had to do and left. There was no money involved with this billeting. People came from nearby bases for training. They would call ahead, we reserved a room, and provided them with sheets, a pillow, and a key. Since there was no payment, people would sometimes leave without checking out, leaving the key on the bed and skipping the inspection. One day, the sergeant and I were tasked with checking on some rooms to see if the occupants had checked out and what the condition of the rooms was. A large group of individuals was coming to the island for a tournament, and they wanted to use the rooms in this building, so a note was left for the few people we had staying there to bring their belongings and move to our main building. After lunch, the sergeant and I picked up the keys, and when we arrived, I began checking the rooms. Room 101. I knocked, no answer, opened the door, and everything was clean. Room 102. Knock, knock, same story. Room 103. I knocked, and when there was no answer, I went in. Right behind the door as I opened it, there was a closet, and hanging in that closet was a naked man, clearly deceased by the purple and gray color of his skin. He was an arm's length away from me when I opened that door, and he was the last thing I expected to find. I know people encounter death frequently, but there is usually a way to prepare yourself for what you are about to see. A smell, a noise, or a mess. Something. But when it is the last thing you expect, that shocked me. Story 57. Witnessed a fatal plane crash at a local airport. A private plane was on final approach to the runway when it collided with high-tension wires, went straight into the ground, and exploded. 3 of the 4 people on board died. Story 58. The day my grandma died, I visited her in the nursing home. She was very ill, had dementia, and her organs were failing. We knew it would happen soon. In the weeks before, she had been to the hospital and was very frail. I sat by her bed, and she started to fight, screaming and punching the air, kicking her feet. She often screamed, "Go away! Leave me alone!" and was calling for her mother. I was confused at first and tried to calm her down, but she didn't listen to me. So I took her seriously and asked if someone was in the room with us. She said yes. I asked what he wanted. She said he wanted to take her away, and she was scared. She told me this so clearly that it didn't sound like she was making it up. So I believed her. I told her that it was all right, she could leave now. My grandfather, who died 2 years prior, and her mother were waiting for her. She didn't have to fight anymore. She became very calm, and about 1 hour later, she passed away. Story 59. Fall of 2004. I decided I wanted a Slurpee from the convenience store behind my apartment complex. I walked over, got my Slurpee, and waited at the intersection for the crossing signal. I was lost in my thoughts, enjoying a beautiful fall day. As I waited, I noticed an SUV trying to turn east from the southbound lane. The driver either misjudged the turn or was not paying attention and collided with a small sedan that entered the intersection heading north. The sedan bounced off the SUV and came to rest on the corner directly across the street from me. I witnessed everything. I immediately ran over to where the car had landed. It was completely mangled. The roof had been peeled off, and debris was everywhere. The passenger, a man in his late 20s to early 30s, was dead. I did not check for a pulse. I could tell from how mangled he looked. The driver, a woman, was in bad shape but alive. She looked scared and had trouble breathing. A moment later, she went into her death throes and passed shortly thereafter. Her last sight was of me standing over her, holding a Slurpee, with what must have been a horrified expression. I went back to my apartment and retrieved my camera. Here are a few of the pictures of the aftermath. They are safe for work. Story 60. Driving my grandpa 30 miles to the hospital while he was having a heart attack was intense. He was praying out loud the entire time. Thankfully, he made it. The doctor he saw was very unpleasant. I was incredibly grateful when my aunt, a veteran emergency room nurse, arrived and told the condescending individual where to go and how to get there. Story 61. Losing my grandmother was incredibly difficult. I was by her side as she took her last breaths, and I will never get over her loss. I would have been a completely different person if I hadn't had her in my life. My mother's favorite is my brother, and I have known that since I was little. He can do no wrong in her eyes. Story 62. I was abandoned by my mother at 19 months and placed in an Eastern European orphanage. I do not have explicit memories from that time, but even 24 years later, I still struggle with attachment and intimacy issues. At 14, my adopted father carelessly placed a hidden camera in my bathroom. He also pinned me to the ground and breathed on me. While he never touched me inappropriately, it was terrifying to be restrained in that way. For me, being hit or whipped was traumatic. I was a very good kid, but the environment in that house filled me with fear and led to bitterness in adulthood. Just 2 weeks ago, I watched my dog go from seemingly fine to gone in less than 6 days. He was 16, so it was expected, but I will never forget the look in his eyes that communicated, "I am in pain and I am ready to go now." I held his lifeless body moments after he had been peacefully breathing, thanks to a sedative. Story 63. My car was damaged by a wheel line irrigation system that malfunctioned. A pipe came through my windshield, hitting my daughter in the head and resulting in a depressed skull fracture. Story 64. I came home from work one day and couldn't locate my then-girlfriend. She hadn't been responding to texts or calls for the previous few hours and had been in a depressed state. Her phone was in the apartment along with all her belongings. I checked the neighbors and numerous other places she might be. Finally, I decided to change out of my work clothes while thinking about what to do next. When I opened the closet door, I saw her. She had hung herself in the closet. I got her down quickly and called emergency services, but it was too late. It's gotten easier as time goes by, but I miss her every day. Story 65. One morning, I woke up in my parents' house and was having coffee with them. My mother was telling me about an unusual dream she had about my 2 cousins. She was asking my younger cousin Will where my older cousin Steve was. Will said he wasn't sure but handed my mother a bouquet of white tulips. My mother had never had a dream about my cousins before and couldn't figure out what it meant. 1 week later, my mom received a phone call from my aunt at 5 a.m. Steve had overdosed and passed away. At his funeral, the flowers were white tulips. There is no way she could have predicted this. He had been clean until recently, was working a great job and doing well. Took us all by surprise. He was 24. The most traumatic thing wasn't my mother's warning dream. It was seeing my aunt collapse in the driveway on the way home from the supermarket because she saw his favorite snack in the store. I've never seen grief take such physical form. Story 66. Removing my brother from life support after a tragic skydiving accident less than 24 hours prior in 2008 has had a lasting impact on my psyche. I felt as though I died with him and have just been existing ever since. Story 67. Not necessarily the most traumatic, but the first I could think of is my great-grandma who died 2 weeks ago. A few hours before she passed, we celebrated her 95th birthday. She was literally just skin and bones, unable to move and completely unconscious. It took a toll on my mental health. I couldn't cope with seeing her so sickly. The last time I saw her before that, she was a very old lady, but relatively healthy and not so corpse-like. Story 68. When I was 6, I was in the back seat of my best friend's dad's farm vehicle. He was in the tray. We were going to the paddock to throw some hay bales out. His dad slowed down as there was a gate ahead. My friend jumped out to get the gate but tripped and fell under the wheel. I opened the door to help and saw him lying there, face up, after the tire had gone over his head. Story 69. I watched 2 full code patients die just a few minutes apart at the beginning of my shift. The second patient had stage 4 stomach cancer and was deteriorating, about to be made a do not resuscitate order and transferred to hospice. It was an awful experience. I held her daughter while she collapsed to the floor and sobbed. After almost 20 years of nursing, not in emergency or intensive care, that felt like the beginning of the end for me. Story 70. A coworker died at work a week before Christmas. He was 19 years old. He had an undetected heart issue since birth. Story 71. I drove my son to bowling practice one day after school. There were several police officers in front of the alley, so I pulled into the Dollar General parking lot next door to drop him off. Many people were sitting there, and I assumed there had been an accident, even though I didn't see any cars on the road. A police officer walked over to the group while I was waiting for my son to get to the alley, and suddenly I heard the most blood-curdling screams. It turned out that a man had been on a motorcycle, and there was a hit and run. He died there in front of the bowling alley, and the people waiting outside were his family members. I can still hear those screams and cries every time I drive past that store. It was heartbreaking. Story 72. A couple of weeks after our high school graduation, my friends and I were enjoying our last summer together. It was a beautiful day, so we decided to go swimming at the local lake. The place was very busy, and we all started goofing around on the dock, pushing each other in. 3 of us jumped in and swam out to the buoys that marked the swimming area. But when we turned around, we couldn't find our 4th friend. We quickly swam back and started asking people about him, yelling his name, but to no avail. Finally, some other teenagers told us that he had gone under the water and hadn't come back up. 2 of us immediately jumped in and started swimming down, but it was dark and 12 feet deep. We couldn't find him. Felt like forever before the divers arrived. They pulled him out about 15 minutes later, but he was long gone. His body was bloated, and his eyes were bulging. The memory of my friend will be burned in my mind for the rest of my life. It has been 13 years. I miss him. Wherever he is, I hope he is resting peacefully. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.